I want to get right to it, and we have Eric Dezenhall and the whole group saga from Canada on the line. Wise guys in the White House, gangsters, presidents, and the deals they made. Eric Dezenhall, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks very much for having me. I'm fine.
Where are you? Where are you clicking in from today?
Washington, D.C.
Ah, everyone's calling in from Washington, D.C. I love it. I want to give you credit. You're the one guy from Washington, D.C. who doesn't have the same white bookcase in the background. So congratulations, Eric. I'm proud of you.
Well, yeah, I have books about crime, so that makes things a little bit different for you.
How did you get into this universe of crime and the road to this book called Wise Guys in the White House?
Well, when I grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, it was considered a mob town. When I was 22 years old, I was a young aide in Reagan's White House. And one of the first things my boss said to me is, "Well, you're from New Jersey. That I know that town. That's a mafia town. You know, they killed Kennedy. They run the country." And I'm sitting here, and the president of the United States just walks out. I had never seen a president close up, and I'm thinking, the mafia runs the country? They do? And ever since that time, more than 40 years ago, I've just been fascinated with this canyon that separates the things people believe with what is true. And a lot of what I have tried to do is set out to try to figure out what's true about the mob and the presidency and what's not true. And that's where it began.
So I grew up in the Nassau County, Long Island area, but my dad had a
Uh,
business in Brooklyn and at the Brooklyn Terminal Market right near JFK, and where they did the Lufthansa heist and Goodfellas,
oh,
right?
yeah.
And my dad believes that Tommy DeSimone, last name is same as us, stole
Right.
his crew stole his '74 Malibu out
Oh,
of the.
Tommy would never do that. Chris, he was just misunderstood.
I never knew it was we were. I saw the movie right until I read Nicholas Pileggi's book because they never say Tommy's last name in the movie, right?
Well,
And
they call him DeVito.
that's right. It's DeVito. That's right. I forgot. And so I never. And then I'm reading the book, going, "Oh my God, he's got the same last name. Holy moly!" And then I said to my dad, and that's when he brought up the story about the Chevy Malibu. So here we are.
Well, the DeSimones were also a very big family in the Los Angeles mob, related to Tommy DeSimone. But it's possible to have a name that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad.
I can neither confirm nor deny any of those connections. Now, so it makes sense, right? The mafia and White House. It just, that's, as we like to say, that's where the money is. It's over at the White House. Talk about plotting out this book and kind of your strategy to do this thing.
Well, I wanted to go into places where I knew there was a connection. And so I cover Roosevelt, Harry Truman, JFK, LBJ, Nixon, Reagan, Trump, and Biden. And there are some people who say, well, why didn't you write more about the Clintons? Well, I couldn't find mafia. This is not a book about corruption in the presidency. It's about the mafia in the presidency.
They're their
They
own.
said, what about well, that's right. There's different types of corruption, and so we start with the fact that FDR had his Navy reach out to Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano to help lock down the waterfront in New York to prevent Nazi sabotage. And I had access to the private journals of Meyer Lansky, who one of the reasons they went to him first was there was concern on the waterfront that Italian Americans might be loyal to Mussolini, which is one of the reasons why Roosevelt declared them enemy aliens, which of course was a mistake. There's really no evidence that Italian Americans were substantially loyal to Mussolini. So they talked to Lansky, who was Jewish, and who got his partner Luciano. And there was really reason to believe that there were Nazis in New York. There was a massive Nazi movement in New York City. And even though um, what happened a few weeks after Pearl Harbor is one of the largest cruise ships in the world that was being retrofitted for troop movement, blew up and sank. And they believed it was Nazi sabotage, which was the catalyst for bringing in Luciano and Lansky. Later, when it was time to plan the invasion of Sicily, the Navy reached out to them again and found contacts in Sicily. Interestingly, FDR, who did FDR put in charge of the waterfront? His best friend, Vincent Astor. Also, FDR's top propaganda advisor was the columnist Walter Winchell. Walter Winchell's neighbor in the Majestic condominium in New York City, or the apartments, was Meyer Lansky. And one of my favorite stories that Lansky recalls in his journals was Winchell used to give Lansky locations of where the Nazis were rallying, and Lansky would send guys to beat them up. And one day he gave Lansky a bum steer, and Meyer ran into him in his building, and said, "Walter, you gave me a bum steer. We showed up. There were no Nazis there." And what Winchell was defensive. He said, "My God, Meyer, I'm so sorry." And Lansky said, "Don't worry, Walter. We found them." And so then we move to the present day, and you hear about Trump and mob ties in New York City. Well, what's interesting is one of the things that Trump says that drives people crazy is when he's accused of something naughty, he says that just makes me smart. Well, if you look at how he actually dealt with the mob in New York City as a developer, how he did it was smart. What he did, for example, was when he built Trump Tower, he didn't use steel, which most people do. He used concrete. Well, the steel industry is an international industry, hard to control. The concrete was controlled by two companies run completely by the mob. So he simply chose concrete to build his building, and he paid them very, very well, and he received labor peace. There is no law against paying somebody very, very well for
Right.
a material, and that's what he did, and he got himself labor peace. So it was a very clever way to do it.
It is true when you talk to someone that you are suspecting might be tied to the mafia and you ask them what they do, but they don't want to tell you, and they go like this with their hand, right? And they go,
Right,
I
right.
dabble in construction. That's all you need to know. Once they say that, it's a done deal.
Well, construction was a big thing, and growing up in New Jersey, the other ones were waste hauling, or better
Right.
said, environmental services, and as well as vending. But what was also interesting that I talk about in Wise Guys in the White House is what LBJ did after the Civil Rights Act was passed. Uh, Civil rights workers started disappearing and getting killed. And he was looking bad. He was looking like he wasn't serious about civil rights. He calls in J. Edgar Hoover and he says, "Find out who did this." Well, J. Edgar Hoover didn't really care much about civil rights. So he had a problem on his hands. He hadn't infiltrated the Klan. So what did he do? He very quietly reached out to a guy they had flipped in 1964 from the Colombo crime family, and he sent this guy in to torture the KKK guys into giving up the location of the bodies and the killers of different civil rights workers, not just the three that went missing in '64, but some that were killed later on. If you see the movie Mississippi Burning with the late Gene Hackman,
Yep.
they make it look like that an African American FBI agent tortured these guys. That's not what happened. What happened was they used a gangster, a mafia guy, to do it. And the tapes of Lyndon Johnson, he doesn't mention mafia, but he says to Hoover, "I don't care what you have to do. Do what you have to do to find out who did this." And the result was the mafia.
Interesting. We're talking to Eric Dezenhall, excuse me, and the book is Wise Guys in the White House: Gangsters, Presidents, and the Deals They Made. You're literally laying out at least a 4-season HBO series. I'm just telling you this with what your work on this. I'm just telling you.
Well, that would be nice. That would be nice. I wouldn't fight it hard, but there's a lot of data there. And a
uh,
lot of mythology, by the way. I mean, the idea that the mob killed Kennedy, I talk a lot about that. I think it's absolutely ridiculous.
well,
But I do think,
now that we have supposedly opened up all these files from recently, I don't know if there's really
yeah.
anything that's that great in those files, but give us the breakdown on the mythology.
Well, the mythology. Well, first of all, Joe Kennedy. Everybody makes the Kennedys out to be one unit. They weren't. I mean, Jack, Bobby, and Joe, they're very different characters. Joe Kennedy, who was not a bootlegger, but people like to think he was. But the way he was able to do what he did was technically legally and not bootlegging. But in the 1960 election, Joe Kennedy reached out for mafia support to help get his son labor support, which he did. The initial guy he contacted was a man named Jimmy Alo. If you saw The Godfather 2, there was Hyman Roth and Johnny Ola.
Oh yeah,
Johnny Ola was based on Jimmy Alo, real guy, Meyer Lansky's partner. And Jimmy Alo said, I don't want to get involved with this. And he said to Joe Kennedy, talk to your friend Sinatra. Sinatra reached out to Sam Giancana of Chicago, and Giancana reluctantly agreed to help out. And they did get Kennedy support, labor support in West Virginia, in Illinois, in New Jersey, and other places. Where things get interesting is when it came time to kill Castro in Cuba, which both of the Kennedy brothers very much wanted. Bobby Kennedy especially wanted Castro dead. He thought it was kind of emasculating to have this communist 90 miles off the coast. And so Bobby Kennedy was told by the CIA when they were working on it, well, here are some of the guys we've talked to. And Bobby Kennedy famously prosecuted mobsters. And he said, I don't want you to use mafia. He was furious. And the CIA essentially said, look, Bobby, you're riding us. You're riding our backs. You want this guy dead, but you only want us to use the nicest people to do it?
right.
Who do you think? Who do you think we're going to get? The Daughters of the American Revolution? And so they did recruit the mafia to go out and kill Castro. There were 7 or 8 attempts. They obviously were not successful. As to your question about the files that were released, the value so far seems to have nothing to do with who killed the president, which I believe the answer is known, but nobody wants to hear about it. But what these files will show is that the CIA was up to a lot of naughty stuff around the world that was previously undisclosed. That doesn't mean that they had anything to do with the assassination, but what I do believe is that the FBI and the CIA had Oswald on their radar and really didn't work hard enough to keep a lid on him, and they were afraid of getting caught having botched the protection of the president. And so, to the extent there was a cover up, there was a cover up. There was a cover up to hide some of the things they were doing, and to hide the fact that they were involved with an assassination program in Cuba, and that they had Oswald on their radar, but they thought he was sufficiently a loser that they didn't stop him.
So what you're saying is Oswald acted alone in doing this?
I'm convinced he acted alone, but I'm also convinced the American public will never accept it, simply because it is not a good story. And if I've learned anything in my both of my careers, it's that the important thing is not what is true, but what people want to believe. If the guy who was killed that day in Dallas was John F. McGillicuddy, killed in the exact same way, it would have been an open and shut homicide. But there was so much craziness around it, the political climate, the fact that the mob really was going after Kennedy. The funniest thing is the CIA guys of that generation loved Kennedy because he was doing everything they wanted him to do. And he was a hardcore anti communist and had no interest in getting out of Vietnam. But that's a better story. But back on point, I think probably the president that had most to do with the mafia was, believe it or not, Harry Truman. Harry Truman was chosen as a Senate candidate by a mafia controlled machine. A lot of people know that Harry Truman came from a politically corrupt machine. What they don't know is that the machine was a Cosa Nostra controlled machine. Truman knew it. He admitted it. He later helped mafia guys who were prosecuted in order to get paroled from prison. But he knew he knew who his sponsors were, and he said later in life in one of his diaries, "Look, I had to let gangsters do some stealing, but I had to let this go for my career and to accomplish other things." There's no evidence that he ever took a dime, but he was probably our most mob relevant president.
I mean, he just that's why I love the idea that you're covering this, because no one even talks about that, right? And
Nobody.
the senator in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, played by Claude Rains, He always hits me as I always remember. He reminds me of Truman in a way, the way they look with the glasses and everything.
Right, right,
And
right.
he was also machine run, so I feel like
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of that, and I think in places like New Jersey, where I grew up, I mean, I think that the mafia ties to politicians was very true. You couldn't get anywhere without them. But what was interesting about this book was the extent to which the mafia was in the background. I mean, Ronald Reagan, the president I worked for, his career mentor was Lou Wasserman of MCA Universal, who built his business on the back of mafia support for labor help. I mean, you didn't get TV shows and movies made without mafia help. Lou Wasserman single-handedly saved Reagan's career and got him the job at GE Theater, which brought him into the American public's living rooms. There's no evidence that Ronald Reagan himself was hanging out with mobsters, but I do think that his career was helped by someone who built his empire on the back of the mafia. And interestingly, when it came time to prosecute the mob, people like I mean, Reagan did not go after the particular mobsters that had been helpful to Lou Wasserman. And so one of the things I saw in the book is some of the same presidents that who benefited from the mob also went after them. Kennedy, Nixon, who passed RICO, and Reagan, who brought down the commission trial in 1986 and 7. And so the question is, what does it tell you that these presidents both went after the mob and benefited from them? Well, it tells you who has the power. And one of the things I conclude in the book is that it was the presidents who got the better end of the deal. I mean, in the end, the mobsters, the guys who broke the laws, didn't have nearly the power as the guys who made the laws. And so if you made the laws, you could both benefit from them and prosecute them.
Lou Wasserman looks strikingly close to Jack Waltz from Godfather One. I just want to let everyone know that. I don't know if there's a
They Well, Lou Wasserman was not. They do physically look very much alike with the tan and the white hair, but the Jack Waltz character was loosely based on Harry Cohn of Columbia Pictures, who helped Sinatra out, and of course the Johnny Fontaine character is supposedly based on Sinatra. We were always amused growing up because Al Martino, who played Johnny Fontaine, lived a few doors down from me.
oh wow.
And we used to throw our football and frisbees over the brick wall surrounding his house just so he would throw it back and we could get a look at him. He was a very, very nice guy.
Tell me about before we say goodbye. Tell me about Joe Biden and the mafia. You mentioned that earlier.
Well, yeah, Joe Biden, his family, his dad had a lot of contacts early in his life with these really kind of racket-tied figures. I mean, one of his father's schemes with some mob-connected guys was a grave vault racket. They were selling faulty grave vaults. It was very, very weird. He never got in a lot of trouble because of it. But my favorite Biden story is this one. When he was running for Senate in 1972, he was a kid. He was very, very young, and he was behind against an incumbent. And his incumbent prepared these attack ads that were going to go all over Delaware newspapers and be distributed. Well, on the eve of the election, Frank Sheeran of the Teamsters, played by Robert De Niro in The Irishman, made certain that the newspapers were not picked up by the Teamsters and distributed. So the ads that were supposedly going to bury Biden somehow, oops, didn't get picked up and distributed, and Biden won. And so, look, the book is a nonpartisan affair. I mean,
Sure.
it's if regardless of your party, you're going to find things that you hate and don't want to believe, and you're going to find things that you love. But the Biden story, I just love the idea of these attack ads just not getting picked up and distributed by the Teamsters.
We're a big believer in we call it everything. Usually, decisions by politicos is motivated by money, power, or vanity, but mostly it's about the money. And
Well, yeah, you make a really good point because one of the things people always ask me is, what about what has replaced the mob, if anything? And the answer is, you write a check. You don't need to bribe somebody in an alley. Nowadays, you openly write a check and you buy yourself a president. And that's true of both parties. The amount of money that these guys receive is absolutely astonishing. Harry Truman left office. He didn't had a lot of money. Nowadays, there are legal ways for presidents to make a fortune, and that's what's replaced the mob.
As Don Corleone told Mike in the Tomato Garden, you can steal a lot more money with a briefcase than I can with a gun.
Yeah, lawyers with a briefcase can steal more than anybody with a gun. That's exactly right.
All right, the book is Wise Guys in the White House: Gangsters, Presidents, and the Deals They Made. I'm telling you, start writing this. I don't know if you're a script writer, but start writing a script for that first season about. I think I would start early, do your Lucky Luciano thing, and I think that'd be fascinating. We'll have to see who's going to play who, but we'll work on it. So love it.
If I had control over it, I would do it. But I love the idea, and I'll tell people in Hollywood you suggested it, and the name DeSimone means something out there.
That's true. So if it ever happens, I expect 0.5%. Is that okay? Can we make that deal? 1/2 of 1%.
Well, if you've seen what I've made from book options, you would be really, really unimpressed with how much money people who aren't big time Hollywood players make. So I'll see what my agent can do for you.
We talk to musicians about how much money they don't make on Spotify on this show, and one guy, Roger Klein, who said he was all these streams on Apple and everything. I said, how much do you make on that? He goes, it barely makes my daughter's car payment. So.
Look, I mean, I got a call from a mobster who knew that I had written a historical novel about Meyer Lansky, and this guy was insane. And he said, "Well, how much did you split with Lansky's family? 5-10 million?" I said, "Well, look. First of all, Meyer Lansky's been dead for 40 years. I didn't split anything." And I said to him, "I'm going to tell you what I made on the book." He said, "You can't try to kid me." He couldn't believe the nickels and dimes that were involved. But there are certain things you do because you love it, and there's certain things you do to make money.
And my last question is, what's your next book, or what are you working on?
I'm not sure right now. I'm just talking about this book. I just got back from Las Vegas, where I spoke at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas, which is a cool place. And so I'm just focused. I'm focusing on talking about this book, and then I'll figure that out. And it'll be between another book and being a granddad. That's my job.
All right, my man. Well, very nice meeting you today. I love the content of this book. I feel like this is going to be one of those fun, easy reads. So I encourage everyone to go out there and go get it. It's on fine book retailers everywhere.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Eric Dezenhall, have a great day, and stay safe out there, my friend.
You bet. Thank you, sir.
All right, let's visit some great sponsors here in the Wake Up universe. When we come back, U.S. Congressman David Schweikert. This is the song they play when I walk up to the Pima County Board of Soups and talk to them for my 3 minutes. Little Mr. Blue Sky by ELO.
You're listening to Wake Up with Chris DeSimone on Live the Dream Media Network.